Story 1. Back in 2016, I learned a lesson I will never forget. I had just started a new job at a small motel. The pay was low, but I needed something stable, and my friend Michael had helped me get the position. My training was quick, just a few days with the owner in the mornings and 2 nights with Michael, who worked the same night shift as me, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. By the end of the week, the owner left on vacation with his wife, and I was left to handle the night shift alone. The motel's office was surrounded by large glass windows, with a glass door at the entrance. There were no night windows, just a monitor showing security cameras around the property. It was about 1 a.m., and I was handling the usual paperwork when a man walked in. He asked if there were any rooms available. Normally, if someone seemed suspicious, the owner had me say we were full, but this man seemed fine at first. Without hesitation, I told him we had a room. As I began checking him in, I noticed him swatting at the air and making strange spitting noises, like he was trying to get rid of invisible flies. It was odd, but I figured it was none of my business. I focused on finishing his check-in quickly. Once I handed him the key, he went on his way. A short while later, he came back. This time, he slammed his hand on the glass door, making me jump. Startled, I looked up to see him staring at me. He opened the door slightly, leaned his head in, and said, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me in?" Trying to stay calm, I replied, "Maybe there is an issue with your key. Let me give you another one." But the look in his eyes made my stomach drop. It was a look of pure hostility. I handed him a new key and watched him head back to his room. I tried texting Michael for advice, but it was late, and he did not respond. A few minutes later, the man came back again, looking angrier than before. Panic set in. I ran into the back office, locked the door, and grabbed my pocket knife, a precaution I always carried for working night shifts. From the office, I could hear him yelling, "Hello? Why will not you let me into my room? Do you not like me?" My heart was pounding, but instead of calling the police like I should have, I decided to handle it myself. I told him through the door, "I am on the phone. I will be right out." Meanwhile, I kept trying to call Michael, but there was no answer. After taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the office. The man was not in sight. Then I heard him in the bathroom, muttering angrily to himself. My blood ran cold as I caught the words, "Kill her, kill her." Still not calling the police, a decision I regret to this day, I decided to get him back to his room. I grabbed another key and said, "Your key was broken. I will escort you to your room." He agreed, but insisted on walking behind me. As we walked, I kept my knife hidden in my sweater sleeve, my hands trembling. I glanced back repeatedly to make sure he wasn't about to attack. When we reached the hallway, he stopped at the wrong door and tried to open it. I pointed to his actual room a few doors down and said, "Oh, this is your room," gesturing to the number on the door. He finally went inside, and I quickly returned to the office and locked the door. It was only later that I realized the room he had been trying to enter was occupied by a lone woman. My stomach churned at the thought of what could have happened if she had opened the door. Not long after, the next guest I checked in was a police officer from a nearby town. I confided in him about the man, and he assured me he would keep an eye out. The following night, the man came back, but this time I kept the doors locked and told him we were fully booked. I reported everything to my boss when he returned, but he did not take it seriously. I ended up working the night shift for another year, enduring other unsettling encounters, but none as frightening as that night. To this day, I think about how naive I was not to call the police sooner. It taught me to trust my instincts and take action when I feel unsafe. That experience was a harsh reminder of how quickly a situation can turn dangerous. Story 2. I work in the pro department of a home improvement store, usually closing shifts. My coworker, who I will call Nicole, often works the same shifts with me. Nicole is incredibly kind, but she's a bit reserved and shy. She is also stunning, which unfortunately means she gets hit on by customers frequently. Most of the time, it is just harmless compliments or the occasional dinner invite, which she politely declines. Nicole has a girlfriend, though, and being constantly flirted with by men makes her uncomfortable. When we first started working together, I suggested she tell these guys she is not into men, but she always said it was not their business. So, she kept that part of her life private. Over time, Nicole and I became close friends, and having her around made the shifts much more enjoyable. We often covered for each other during breaks, and the time passed a lot faster with her there. One day, I came back from my lunch break, and Nicole told me about a man who had been hitting on her earlier. She said she politely turned him down, explaining she was with someone already. While he seemed a little annoyed, he left without much of a fuss. I laughed it off, thinking it was just another guy who could not take a hint. Later that same day, the man came back. Nicole had stepped away to help a customer in the lumber section, so it was just me at the counter. He walked up and looked around before telling me he was there to see Nicole. I asked him how he knew her, and he said he had asked her out earlier, and she had said yes. He claimed he was there to pick her up. That sounded suspicious to me, so I told him Nicole had already left for the day. This was a small lie to protect her, but his demeanor shifted. He looked annoyed and said he needed to speak to her again because he wanted to ask her out a second time, which contradicted his earlier story. When I told him he could not do that, he crossed his arms and demanded to know why not. I am not the best at coming up with excuses on the fly, but I did not want to reveal anything Nicole wanted to keep private. So, without thinking, I blurted out, "Because Nicole is my fiancée." His face twisted in confusion, and he sneered. "Someone like her is with someone like you? I am no Jason Momoa, but I do not think I am that bad-looking." Still, I held my ground and said it did not matter because Nicole and I were getting married in a couple of months, and he needed to leave her alone. He gave me a death stare but walked out without another word. When Nicole came back, I told her about the encounter. She was creeped out but found the fiancé story hilarious. She even joked that she would rather be engaged to me than go out with a guy like that, which I took as a compliment. A couple of weeks passed, and we forgot about the incident. Then, one night, as we were closing up, it happened. Nicole and I were bagging trash near the registers when a loud bang at the door made us both jump. We turned to see the same guy, his face pressed against the glass with a wild look in his eyes. "We're closed," I shouted, but he ignored me. Nicole yelled at him to go away and said she was not interested, but his response sent a chill down my spine. "I am not here for her. I am here for you," he said, his voice dripping with malice. Then he added, "If I take out her husband, she'll be mine." I told Nicole to run to the manager's office and call the police while I stayed to keep an eye on him. I was terrified. The guy was not huge, but there was no telling if he had a weapon, and store policy prohibited us from carrying anything for self-defense. The man started ramming the sliding doors like a madman. The whole frame shook, and I was sure the doors would come off their tracks. Just then, Nicole came back, holding a 2x4 and yelling that the cops were on their way. That seemed to scare him off. He took one last look at us and ran into the night. When the police arrived, our closing manager showed them the security footage. The man was arrested a few days later. Nicole and I were relieved, but neither of us felt safe working there anymore. We both quit not long after and moved on to different jobs while attending college. Looking back, I am grateful Nicole was there to back me up that night. She says she feels the same, as having a guy around made the situation less dangerous for her. The experience was a wake-up call about how dangerous it can be for some women when a man refuses to take no for an answer. Story 3. I used to work at a small, unassuming hotel in our town. This place, like much of the town, had seen better days. A hurricane had blown through a few months before, leaving a trail of destruction. Homes were wrecked, and many folks had to pack up and leave. The hotel was about a 20-minute walk from my house, and I would rather not mention the name of the town or the hotel. I do not want this coming back to me. It was one of those standard bed and breakfast setups. You know the kind. Soggy scrambled eggs, frozen sausage links, and a small selection of cereal boxes. After the hurricane, the hotel saw a brief spike in guests, mostly locals whose homes had been too damaged to stay in. But as weeks passed, the place got quieter than ever. I worked the night shift from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. Another staff member would take over after me and work until late morning. Most nights, we only had a handful of rooms booked. On this particular night, there were about 9 guests staying. The lobby was dead quiet, and I spent most of my time in the back break room, where we had a coffee machine, a fridge, and a couple of old chairs. The front desk had a little bell that guests could ring if they needed help. That night, I was sitting in the break room when I heard a deep voice calling out, "Hello," repeatedly from the lobby. I got up and walked through the door to the front desk. A man was standing on the other side of the glass barrier, staring at me. The barrier had a small opening at the bottom where items could be passed through. He said he needed extra towels. I grabbed a couple from the supply closet and slid them under the glass. He snatched them a little too roughly and gave me this weird look before heading toward the hallway leading to the rooms. Something about him made me uneasy, so I sat down at the monitor station and watched him on the security cameras. He walked slowly, looking around as if he was searching for something. Then, out of nowhere, he started rubbing the towels against his face. I muttered, "What in the world?" The man eventually got into the elevator, and I went back to the break room, trying to shake off the weird encounter. About 10 minutes later, I heard the same deep voice again. I walked back to the front desk, and there he was, standing just as before. This time, he was louder, saying, "My key card is broken." I asked him for his room number, and he gave me something completely made up, like 2C. Our rooms only had numbers, no letters, so I immediately knew he was lying. I said, "Sir, our rooms do not have letters. Are you sure you are staying here?" That is when things took a horrifying turn. His smile widened, and he pressed his face against the glass. In a chilling voice, he said, "I am going to kill you." He said it again, louder each time, until he was practically screaming it. My heart was racing. I yelled back, "I am calling the police," and picked up the phone, making sure he could see me dialing 911. Even then, he kept that creepy smile, mocking me as I spoke to the dispatcher. The man eventually turned and walked out of the building, but not before taking his sweet time, as if daring me to do something. I told the dispatcher he had left and decided against having an officer come out since he was gone. For the rest of my shift, I stayed in the lobby, too shaken to go back to the break room. One guest checked in during that time, and at 2 a.m., my replacement arrived. I clocked out and headed home. The walk home was quiet and cold. I regretted not bringing a thicker jacket. As I crossed the parking lot, I heard a voice. It was faint, coming from a line of bushes near the building. I could not make out what it said, but I did not want to stick around to find out. I quickened my pace, heading toward the main road. The streets were empty, the only sound being my footsteps on the pavement. Then, I heard another set of footsteps, light, quick, and deliberate. I turned around, but the noise stopped. There was a car parked nearby, and I felt certain someone was hiding behind it. That is when I heard it. A low, familiar voice whispered, "I am going to kill you." My stomach dropped. I knew it was him. I glanced around, trying to figure out my next move. Running was not an option. I was wearing my work shoes. Then, I spotted a house with an upstairs light on. Someone was awake. I bolted for the front door, yelling for help. Just as I reached the porch, the man grabbed me from behind and started choking me. He whispered in my ear, "Die." I thought it was the end. My vision blurred, and I felt my strength fading. Suddenly, the front door flew open, and a man shouted, "Hey!" The attacker let go and ran off into the night. The homeowner helped me inside, gave me water, and called the police. I told the officers everything. They reviewed the hotel's security footage and eventually called me in to identify the suspect in a lineup. But when I looked at the men, none of them seemed to match. Maybe I was too rattled, or maybe he was not there. To this day, I hope I did not let a dangerous man go free. I quit that job shortly after. Working nights at that hotel had always been lonely, but now it felt downright unsafe. I will never forget that man's twisted smile and the fear he left behind.